I want you to just pause for a moment with me and look around. Before I began to be a priest, I used to think that the congregation had the best view because you get to see these beautiful flowers and altar and stained glass windows. What I didn't realize was that I would have the best view. I get to see your faces, and you are so beautiful. Our lives have become so busy that we often don't look, do we, at one another. We may take a selfie of ourselves, but we don't always stop and look. There are many depictions of the resurrection in all four of the Gospels, of how it happened, of who was there, who showed up first, who showed up second. And just like if we were to tell a story, we would tell it differently. They all have the basic facts the same, but the characters shift a little bit and who does what. But there is one person who is present at that tomb on Easter morning in all four of the gospel accounts. Her name was Mary Magdalene. Tradition tells us through the centuries that she was a prostitute. But there is not a word for prostitute in the Gospels at all. What we do know about her is that she had 7 demons. Now, in the time of Jesus, a demon was sort of an umbrella concept. It was whenever someone acted in a way that was bizarre and made no sense, and there was no physical reason, nothing you could see that would make them act in such a way. So demons could have been everything from epilepsy to people cutting themselves to schizophrenia and talking to voices of people that aren't there. And if Mary had 7, that meant she was doing 7 different bizarre things. It meant that she was tormented. There was no way she could have been a businesswoman making money in such a way. People who were possessed were outcasts. They were homeless. Like we see some of the schizophrenic homeless on the streets today. That was the life that she was living before Jesus came. And when he came, he healed her. He healed her body and mind. And from that moment on, she would never leave his side, not through all of his ministry, not at the cross. She is the only person present at the cross in all 4 of the gospel accounts, and the only one, the first one, to reach the tomb. She couldn't be parted from him. You know, when we get scared and our lives seem out of control, most of us Americans think that we need to do more and run faster and scroll more, right? When Mary first comes to the tomb and sees that the stone has been rolled away, she responds just like we would. She runs away. She runs to get Peter and John, the beloved disciple, and she brings them back, and they can't believe it. And so they run away and they go get more people. And everybody's rushing this way and that way. But then Mary does something different. something that is essential. If you want to touch eternity, this is how you do it. You do what Mary did. It says in the Gospel of John, she stood still. She stood still, crying her eyes out. And as she's standing there, her eyes are opened. She sees. Looking in the tomb, she sees two angels. And they ask her why she's crying. Because angels come from a very different perspective. And according to them, nothing sad had happened, right? And then she turns her head the other way and she sees this man, but she doesn't recognize him. And he asks her the same question, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." And he says her name, just like he's always calling out your name. And when Mary hears her name, her eyes open even further, and she sees that it's Jesus. She touches eternity in that moment. If you belong to the Christian tradition, then you will understand when I tell you that resurrection is not about what happens when you die. I mean, that's part of it. But what most of us fail to understand is that resurrection began the moment you were baptized. As soon as that water poured over your head, you became an eternal being. You became a child of the resurrected Christ. But the problem is that we are so busy that we have forgotten who we are. We are clouded over with a haze of a cacophony of noise. Do this, do that. Pick up your phone. And we've forgotten who we are. If you want to know who you are, be still and touch eternity. When I was in seminary, I met a man who became a good friend of mine. His name was Gil Ott. He was a Vietnam veteran. Late one night, we were having a beer, and yes, I'm an Episcopalian, sorry. And I asked Gil about his life. How did he end up going to seminary from Vietnam? And he said, "Kate, I was 19 years old when I was drafted into that war. And from the moment I landed in Vietnam, it was hell. I tried to stay high or drunk all the time just to pretend I wasn't even there. I thought I was going to die all the time. I had no idea what I was fighting for or why. And there was this night, it was a horrible night of fighting. You know, the Viet Cong were everywhere. No one could ever see them. Shots were going everywhere. And I was standing in the middle of the jungle, believing this was the end, just firing my machine gun around me like this, just firing and firing and firing into the darkness. And for some reason that I'll never understand, I just stopped. And I stood still. And there was this silence. And I looked up and I saw that the sun was just beginning to rise, and the rays of the sun filtered through the leaves of the trees. And I felt this peace. that I had never known before, that I didn't know was there. I touched eternity. And then the fighting resumed, and I kept on firing my machine gun, and the hell came back, and it was horrible, and I survived. And I came back to this country, and I was an alcoholic, and I couldn't keep a job, and my life was a mess. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered that one moment, that one drop of peace, that one touch of heaven. It would not leave me, and I began searching for it. I couldn't even say it. I couldn't have articulated what I was doing. But I began to wander from place to place, and one Sunday I ended up in a Quaker meeting. Have you all ever been to a Quaker meeting? Well, basically, they don't talk. They just sit in silence. And Gil said, I touched it again in that meeting. And I kept searching. And I found that if I sat still in the morning with my Bible, I felt it again. Not all the time, but occasionally I would touch this presence. And so, like Mary Magdalene, he just pursued it. He needed it. It was about his very survival. And he got into AA and recovery, and he started studying the Bible, and he became a Methodist, and he landed in seminary. It took him decades before we were there that night drinking beer. But you know who you are. I know you do, or you wouldn't be here this morning. Maybe you felt it under a tree one day. Maybe it's while you're driving your car. Maybe it's when you look at someone you love. I mean, really look at them. But you wouldn't be here if you hadn't touched eternity before. If you hadn't found something that you really, really wanted more of. My friends, what we don't understand is that the resurrection life is not dependent on anything that happens here. You can touch eternity when you're in the midst of a terrible divorce, when you lose your job, when you're in pain, when you're sick. It doesn't matter. Because God is not dependent on all this stuff that happens here. And you can't control this world anyway. In fact, the only hope we have is by finding that peace again, so that everything we do comes from that place. As the psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. I was before, I am now, and I will be forever. And you will be with me, my children. After Mary Magdalene touches eternity and sees the resurrected Christ, even though she hasn't spoken at all in all of the Gospels before this morning, Jesus says, go out and tell them that I've risen. And she goes out and says, I've seen the Lord. I think she was the first preacher. And after that, you never hear from her again, because it was enough. It was everything she needed and more. After you go out from this service and out into that crazy world again, take a moment every day just to be still. Touch eternity and remember who you are. Amen.